At the beginning of time, before the creation of Arda, Eru would first create the Ainur. Of this race there existed the Valar, the gods under the One, and the Maiar, essentially demigods who assist the Valar later on. Of the Valar there lived the mightiest among them, Melkor, the brother of fellow Vala Manwe. To Melkor, among the Ainur, had been given the greatest gifts of power and knowledge, and he had a share in all the gifts of his brethren. The Ainur would soon create song and music under the guidance of Iluvatar. However, during the first theme, Melkor would rebel and sow discord among the great singing. Though to this Eru would arise, with the Ainur perceiving that he smiled, as he raises his left hand, causing a new theme, a second theme, to commence, one described as like but unlike the original. However, as you may expect, Melkor would once again continue to spread discord and attempt to corrupt the music of the Ainur, this time more fell and more violent. Furthermore, a handful of the Maiar would attune their music to his, sharing in his chaotic thought. This time, Iluvatar rises with a more stern expression, raising his right hand to begin a third theme, one different from the first two and one more beautiful, progressing further than the others. Now, having to rise for a third time, Iluvatar's face was terrible to behold, and he raised both hands, and in a single chord, deeper than the abyss, the music ceased. Iluvatar continues by stating the following. Mighty are the Ainur, and mightiest among them is Melkor, but that he may know, and all the Ainur, that I am Iluvatar, those things that ye have sung, I will show them forth, that ye may see what ye have done. And thou, Melkor, shalt see that no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me. Nor can any alter the music in my despite. For he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful, which he himself hath not imagined. Now the Ainur were fearful, and Melkor was full of shame, and possessed a hidden anger. After learning of many things, and of many of the plans of Eru, including the coming of the children of Iluvatar, which would include elves and men, some of the Ainur would eventually enter into the created universe known as Ea, which they had learned of and seen in visions. Now, some of the Ainur would stay with Iluvatar in the Timeless Halls, but as I mentioned, some of them would travel to Ea, including Manwe, the most noble of the Valar, Aule, the smith of the Valar, and Ulmo, the Valar known as the Lord of Waters. They would come to find, to their surprise, that the world was not yet constructed as they had seen in their aforementioned visions, so they began to form Arda, the world, and a wonderful creation it was. However, joining them in the boundaries of Ea would also be Melkor, who sought to dominate the wills of the children of Iluvatar when they awoke. Melkor actually initially desired the power of creating life, the flame imperishable, however this solely belongs to Iluvatar. Therefore he believed that he could at least rule over those he deemed lesser than himself. In fact, Melkor would make an effort to destroy and corrupt everything the other Valar created, raising their valleys, lowering their mountains, and spilling their seas. Melkor despised the great forms the Ainur would take, of fair men and women, and the shape they sometimes took of the kings and queens among the children of Iluvatar, and he took a form of his own, one of pure malice and envy, dark and terrible. Thus he would continue to work against the other Ainur, leading to the war before the arrival of the firstborn, the elves. In this battle, Melkor would flee from the champion of the Valar, Tulkas. So came Tulkas the Strong, whose anger passes like a mighty wind, scattering cloud and darkness before it. And Melkor fled before his wrath and his laughter, and forsook Arda, and there was peace for a long age. During this peace, the Valar would continue constructing Arda and bring order to the misdeeds of Melkor, with Yavanna, another Vala, and the giver of fruits, planting the seeds of the earth at long last. Yavanna, the wife of Aule, would pray to her husband to construct the two lamps for the lighting of Middle-earth, and he built them amid the encircling seas. However, during a feast at which Tulkas is wedded to Nessa, Melkor would use the event as a distraction and sneak over the walls of night, destroying the two pillars holding the lamps, Iluin and Ormal. In the north, Melkor would eventually build his strength and, without rest, begin laboring and watching, constructing his stronghold of Utumno. Evil would spread and fell creatures would roam, including the Maiar who vowed their allegiance to the Dark Lord, some who became demons of fire cloaked in shadow, the Balrogs. Melkor would soon after begin the construction of another fortress, Angband, and one he would put under the control of his chief lieutenant, Sauron, The Valar were now, of course, aware that Melkor had returned to Arda, though they would be occupied with spending their strength on keeping the world intact. With the world now changed, the Valar would leave Middle-earth and move to a separate continent of the world known as Aman, building up Valinor. This would be where the highest peak of Arda is located, the mountain known as Taniquetil, which is where Manwë and his wife Varda, the queen of the Valar, would reside. The spring of Arda, which was supposed to be a glorious time in history, ended in calamity. Nevertheless, it is in Valinor where Yavanna would sing into existence the two trees of light, Telperion and Laurelin, the silver and gold tree respectively. These trees would grow great and would be watered by the tears of Nienna, yet another of the Valar. Let it be known that some of the Valar did not desire to completely desert Middle-earth, including Ulmo, Yavanna, and Orome, the huntsmen of the Valar, who actually would hunt and kill many of the lurking terrors of Melkor. When the elves finally awoke in Cuiviénen, Melkor would instill fear into them, and it is said that he would capture a number of them and torture them within the walls of his fortress, corrupting them into orcs, an insult to the other Ainur, and more specifically a mockery to the creations of Iluvatar, that all those of the Quendi who came into the hands of Melkor, ere Utumno was broken, were put there in prison, and by slow arts of cruelty were corrupted and enslaved. And thus did Melkor breed the hideous race of the orcs, in envy and mockery of the elves, of whom they were afterwards the bitterest foes. As a result of not wanting Melkor to utterly destroy this new race, the Valar would summon their full might and begin the battle of the powers against Morgoth, the name given to Melkor by the elves who feared to speak his true name. Despite many evils escaping, including Sauron and the Balrogs, Utumno would be destroyed for the most part and Morgoth would lose the battle, being taken as a prisoner to Valinor where he would be judged for his actions. The Valar would decide to keep Melkor in the halls of Mandos, the doomsman of the Valar, where he would stay imprisoned for 3 ages, sulking in his anger and embarrassment. As a reference, 3 ages would be about 300 Valian years, which are about 9.5 normal years, meaning Melkor was confined for close to 2,850 years. At the end of this time, Melkor would beg for pardon to his brother Manwë, the king of the Valar, and Manwë would allow Melkor to roam freely, but solely in the confines of Valinor, much to the dislike of Tulkas and Ulmo. In the city of Valimar, Morgoth would attempt to sow even more discord amongst the elves who decided to join the Valar in Valinor, the Amanyar, the Elves of Light. There were 3 groups of the High Elves, including the Noldor, the Teleri, and the Vanyar, though Melkor would target the Noldor due to the Vanyar not trusting him and the Teleri being deemed too weak for his designs. Some of the Noldor actually desired to learn from him. Attempting to corrupt the Noldor using the spreading of lies and deceit, Melkor especially desired to gain the favor of a great smith amongst them, in fact, the greatest smith of the elves, Feanor, the son of the first king of the Noldor, Finwë. Feanor would create many things of wonder, including the Palantiri, but Melkor specifically had his eyes on the 3 Silmarils, the jewels of Feanor, and his most prized possessions, magnificent in design and bright, containing the light of the 2 trees. Despite the 2 having such disdain for the other, Melkor would use Feanor as his tool as he begins to spread lies about the Valar, and tells the elves about the coming of men. Specifically, he would exclaim that the Valar brought the elves to Valinor so they could rule Middle-earth entirely for themselves, seeing men as easy enough to overthrow without the aid of the elves. Unaware that the fabricated rumors came from Melkor, Feanor would believe them and become aggrieved, being already a very prideful being, causing strife between many of the Noldor and the Valar. Melkor creates yet another lie, causing Feanor to believe that one of his 2 younger half-brothers, Fingolfin, is attempting to usurp him as Finwë's heir, and also that Fingolfin desires to steal his Silmarils, though there is little truth to this. After Feanor threatens Fingolfin, who he never had the most amount of love for in the first place, he is banished from the city, even with Fingolfin taking no offense and even politely defending his half-brother from the judgment of the Valar. Being banished from Valmar and Tirion, Feanor would stay at his people's fortress of Formenos in northern Valinor. Though as Feanor is on trial for his wrongdoings, it is revealed to the Valar that Melkor is the one behind the murmurs of deceit amongst the Noldor, and Tulkas immediately departs in search for Morgoth in Valinor. He is unable to find him, though sometime later, about 2 years in the Years of the Trees, Morgoth would appear to Feanor at Formenos. Using his deceitful form of fairness, Melkor would offer Feanor friendship and revenge on the Valar, who Feanor greatly disliked, particularly so after feeling wronged by them when he was banished. Melkor states that he has been friendly to the Noldor and says that he is also of the Valar, stating that he is more than those who sit with pride in Valamar, referring to the other Valar. Being tempted by the words of Melkor, and being still freshly bitter towards the Valar, Feanor is somewhat convinced and considers if he might yet trust Morgoth enough to at least aid him in his escape. However, Melkor would continue and push it too far, mentioning the Silmarils. "Here is a strong place, and well guarded, but think not that the Silmarils will lie safe in any treasury within the realm of the Valar." Suddenly, Feanor saw through Melkor's fair semblance, and had seen his true desire and his lust for the Silmarils, Feanor's own gems, the ones he had created and had his own greed for. Realizing his hope of swaying Feanor was fruitless now, Melkor would depart in shame and anger, and despite desiring revenge against Feanor, he was well aware of his own danger by ambling around, where the other Valar may perhaps discover him. In fact, the watch for Melkor was redoubled, and Tulkas and Orome believed they could cut Morgoth off at his old stronghold, where they believed he would be heading. But he was not there, nor was there any trace of him. Melkor would instead travel to the southeastern and mountainous section of Aman, to the shadowed valley of Abathar. In this forsaken land dwelt a creature of gargantuan size and terror, taking the form of an arachnid, her name Ungoliant. Ungoliant hungered for light, and hated it, and she spun her dark webs in the dreadful shadows of Abathar, forever famished. Melkor would approach her and put on the same form he used as the Dark Lord of Utumno, tall and terrible. He remained in this form ever after. But when Ungoliant understood the purpose of Melkor, she was torn between lust and great fear, for she was loath to dare the perils of Aman and the power of the dreadful lords, and she would not stir from her hiding. Therefore Melkor said to her, "Do as I bid, and if thou hunger still when all is done, then I will give thee whatsoever thy lust may demand. Yea, with both hands." Lightly he made this vow, as he ever did, and he laughed in his heart. Thus did the great thief set his lure for the lesser. After listening to Melkor's speech, Ungoliant decided to assist him in his evil endeavors, for she hungered for anything they could corrupt. So she wove a cloak of darkness to wrap around the two of them, and they traveled unseen towards the two trees of light. As the Valar celebrated during a time of festival, Melkor drove his spear into the bark of both trees, piercing them deep, and allowing for Ungoliant to devour the leaking sap, as if it was blood from a wound. She inserted her beak into the wounds and drained the trees of all light, and poison entered the roots, and the holy trees were dead. A new darkness fell upon Valinor, and in the confusion Melkor fled to Formenos, and there slew Finwë, stealing Feanor's 3 Silmarils, as there was no one else present to guard them, and now Melkor's vengeance was achieved. However, as he drew closer to returning to his abode in Angband, Ungoliant perceived his desire to escape from not only the Valar, but her as well, and she stopped him.
"Blackguard, I have done thy bidding, but I hunger still."
"What wouldst thou have more?" said Morgoth. "Dost thou desire all the world for thy belly? I did not vow to give thee that. I am its lord."
"Not so much, but if thou hast a great treasure from Formenos, I will have all that. Yea, with both hands thou shalt give it."
Melkor opened his left hand and surrendered the lesser gems from Feanor's treasury to her, and she devoured them, growing even greater. However, she would tell him to open his right hand this time, and in this hand he held the Silmarils. After refusing to bequeath to her the Silmarils, which he greatly desired as I mentioned before, she turned against him, and enmeshed him in her dark webs. Melkor would send forth a terrible cry, and because of this, the region would henceforth be referred to as Lamath, meaning Great Echo. This dreadful shout would be heard in the ruined halls of Angband, and passing over Hithlum to Lamath, the Balrogs would arrive and aid their master, using their whips of fire to free Melkor and drive off Ungoliant. The great spider would flee beneath Ered Gorgoroth, to a valley now known as Nandangortheb, the Valley of Dreadful Death. Ungoliant would spawn many children, one who you may know, the spider Shelob, a terror lurking in Cirith Ungol later on in the Third Age. Nonetheless, it is assumed that Ungoliant, possessing a ceaseless hunger, devoured herself, and so put an end to a significant potential threat to Arda. Melkor would return to Angband and forge an iron crown, with 3 slots to perfectly fit each Silmaril to wear upon his head. At this point, and with his return to Middle-earth, he would be referred to as Morgoth Bauglir. His plan to dominate Middle-earth and take control of Beleriand. In the next video, which will be a part 2 to this video, I will cover all of the battles in Beleriand and the rest of Melkor's history. I think having 2 parts to this will make it more digestible for you guys and will give you another video to perhaps look forward to. Melkor does have quite a substantial history to cover, especially considering the fact that his history essentially completely intermingles with the entire First Age in the Valiant years. Anyhow, have a great day. See ya.